Warning: the content in this video are both graphic and violent. Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be looking into one of the most sickest and saddest and honestly most selfish acts of violence to ever take place, which left one woman in jail the rest of her life while leaving another woman scarred both mentally and physically for the rest of hers. This is the case of Dynel Lane. This horrible act of violence takes place on March 18, 2005 in the small town of Longmont, Colorado. 35-year-old Dynel Lane had posted an ad on Craigslist advertising free maternity and baby clothes. Lane had been living at the Longmont home with both her boyfriend, David Ridley, along with her two younger daughters at the time. Lane, who was said to have faked her own pregnancy for nearly a year, would receive skepticism from everyone around her, including her boyfriend. She would often take photos and post them to Facebook, leading everyone to believe she was pregnant, even going as far as to download fake ultrasound pictures from the internet claiming them to be hers. David Ridley, who lived with Lane and her two daughters, would later testify at her trial that for a year Lane claimed they were expecting a boy whom they planned on naming James. Lane was a former nurse's aide and had lost her only son in a tragic drowning incident in the year of 2002. Tragically, her one-year-old son would drown to death in a pond in Pueblo, Colorado. With her previous experience as a nurse, she would attempt CPR but would not be successful. Lane declined to speak at the sentence hearing, but the court would hear from her mother, who said that her daughter was still suffering from the side effects of losing her young son and was desperate for another child. Michelle Wilkins, who was 27 years old at the time, was a would-be first-time mother as she was 7.5 months pregnant and was very eager to reply to Lane's ad for free maternity and baby clothes. Michelle Wilkins was as excited for the arrival of her new daughter as any new parent would be. Wilkins already had a name picked out for her new baby girl, in which she named her Aurora. Wilkins and Lane would talk back and forth before finally agreeing on meeting at Lane's Longmont home. But what would happen next would shock the whole state of Colorado. Wilkins would show up to Lane's Longmont home alone that day, ready to pick up the free clothes as Lane had advertised. The two would end up in Lane's basement and would chat back and forth for more than an hour, Lane would later admit in a recording for detectives. But as Wilkins turned around to leave, Lane reportedly hit Wilkins over the head with a lava lamp and would choke the 7.5 months pregnant Wilkins unconscious. After choking the pregnant Wilkins, Lane would then pick up a knife and proceed to cut the unborn fetus out of Wilkins' womb while she lay bleeding on the floor. Lane's boyfriend, David Ridley, showed up shortly after, telling detectives he was supposed to take Lane to a prenatal appointment. Lane told Ridley that she had miscarried and that the baby was upstairs in a bathtub. Ridley would then find the baby in a tub, which he would roll her over and notice her still gasping for air. He would then rush both Lane and the baby to the hospital. But by then it was too late, as baby Aurora would pass away long before making it to the hospital. On the way, Lane would tell Ridley that the baby was his. But after making it to the hospital, she was eventually met by police, where she had told them she had never been pregnant. Wilkins survived the attack and was able to gain consciousness and lock the door of the basement and call 911. A doctor who helped took the stand and testified Wilkins had lost half her blood in the attack. One day after having surgery to treat her wounds, Wilkins would learn that her baby didn't survive. Wilkins and baby Aurora would eventually be reunited in the hospital, though the reunification would take place after the baby had already been pronounced dead. Almost a year after the tragedy, the trial would begin. Dynel Lane did not take the stand in the Boulder courtroom, where she was charged with the attempted murder of Michelle Wilkins, along with the felony assault and unlawful termination of a pregnancy. But instead, Lane's version of everything was shared in a 50-minute long video, in which she claimed Wilkins attacked her first. Wilkins would recall in court being stabbed with broken glass and then being choked by Lane before she then blacked out. She also testified being able to feel her intestines outside of her body. No witnesses were called in Lane's defense. A jury convicted Dynel Lane in February 2015, nearly a year after her violent acts, and sentenced Lane to 100 years in prison without the possibility of getting out. The attack on the victim contained a number of components, luring the victim into a secluded place, subduing her, rendering her unconscious so that surgery, if you can call it surgery, could be performed, and finally removing the baby from the victim's wound. The ruling read, at any point in time until the end, Lane could have decided to terminate her criminal conduct, but she did not. Wilkins would go on to tell the Denver Post that the verdict was a triumph for justice. This led for Colorado Republicans to introduce legislation that would have allowed a murder charge for the unborn fetus. Democrats, however, rejected the measure, which was the third time such a proposal failed in Colorado. Currently, there are 38 states that made a fetus killing a homicide. On September 14, 2015, Wilkins was a guest on the Dr. Phil show, detailing her whole story. As of today, Dynel Lane remains in custody at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility, serving out her sentence with no hope or chances of getting out. After the trauma that turned her world upside down, Wilkins moved back to North Carolina for 5 years. After taking her own time to grieve, she now lives back in Boulder, Colorado, the source of her pain as well as her healing. Wilkins, who now goes by the name Allie, says that healing, although a slow process, is possible. And for her, therapy, volunteering in the community, acupuncture, dancing, and biking have all played a role. Alright, everybody, and that was the case of Dynel Lane. Not only was that one of the most violent cases I ever heard of, but definitely one of the most selfish acts a human being could ever commit. If you like true crime stories, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.